Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to discuss the matter of torque and horsepower. So the horsepower is a unit of power, same as other units like watt, and it presents an amount of energy produced in a defined period of time. And torque represents a twisting force that tends to cause a rotation for a mechanical part that pivots, and it is the distance from where the force is applied times the force itself. So we used to look at engine specification sheets and we find torque and power mentioned separately. That makes a lot of people believe that these two amounts are always separate. But according to this equation, you'll see that the power is directly linked to the amount of torque you have in the engine. So the more torque you have, the more horsepower you will have. And also you should never forget about your RPM, which represented as angular speed in this equation. And we only called that because it needed a units conversion. And the 2p and the 60 represents the units conversion from the rotation per minute to radians per second, and the 2p for the radians from one rotation to radians, and 60 from minute to seconds. So what is confusing about these two amounts of torque and horsepower is when you bring two cars that have the same horsepower but one have more torque than the other, and a lot of people get confused. But you will definitely find the RPM higher in the car having a lower torque. Remember, the power is representing the amount of energy produced in a defined time, and the unit of time in this equation is coming from the RPM, and that's gonna give you the idea that the RPM is a very important thing, and the torque also very important. But sometimes you find two different cars with same amount of torque, but one is more powerful than the other just because the engine can have a more RPM, and that's possible because of a different facts. So the amount of torque depends on the distance where the connecting rod is connected to the crankshaft, and the more distance you have from the center of the crankshaft, you will have more torque. In this case, you will find it in trucks. Big trucks always have bigger crankshafts, and also the amount of torque depends on the amount of force on top of the piston, simply because if you want to measure the amount of torque, you're gonna use the projection of the forces on top of the pistons in that point, and you apply it in the distance. However, if you increase the size of crankshaft and you have a greater distance between the connecting rod and the center of the crankshaft, you will definitely have a slower engine because the distance is going to be covered in one turn, is going to be greater and take longer time. But on sports cars, that light and small crankshaft that's being used is going to be smaller, and thus you're going to have a lower torque, but you're going to have a higher RPM. Also, the torque depends on the number of cylinders in your car. The more cylinders you have, you will have more torque.